In this video, we'll map out the service area for Chariot Mobility in Charleston, South Carolina. One of the better, if not the best tool for drafting your market mapping is Google My Maps. It is an intuitive and easy to build map layering system with Google's familiar user interface. A little directional housekeeping on that note. The three main functions you will use are the layering, here on the left-hand menu, the polygonal drawing tool under the search bar, and the pin drop feature next to the draw a line. The layering feature will make evaluating different geofence types clearer than having them all stacked in one layer. The polygonal tool is very similar to the Joyride mapping function and is the most accurate way to draw uniquely shaped zones. Key points to consider are elevation within the city, dense urban cores, and micromobility friendly connectivity, aka bike paths or protected bike lanes. Also, be wary of waterways if your city, like Charleston, is coastal and/or bisected by a river. Vandals worldwide have adopted scooters and e-bikes thrown into water as a means of some nefarious goals. Take precautions. As a Charleston resident launching Chariot, I have a good feel for the city. It's home to 2 universities, a large downtown urban core, and a rapidly growing multifamily living corridor. My gut tells me that I might have too big an area to properly service with 700 vehicles. So, in an effort to ensure that I capture as much demanded rides as possible, I will look to keep my deployment zones proximal enough to ensure highest utilization, while also allowing organic drop-offs on the fringes of my zone to test where expanded fleet capacity could yield future growth areas. As a first step, I'm going to spend an afternoon driving around town. I'm going to observe how current cyclists are interacting with cars and the main thoroughfares, as well as identify any problem areas that might not be obvious on first inspection. I immediately know I'm going to be cautious of all interactions along Interstate 26, running north and south here, and Highway 17, connecting Charleston to the Hog Island part of town across the bay. But thankfully, being the old colonial city it is, Charleston is relatively speed capped in the majority of the downtown areas, and bikes, pedestrians, and cars interact without much issue. That said, I still want to know where all the bike paths are. Unfortunately, for all the intuition within Google My Maps, they don't have the bike filter that regular Google Maps has. So, you need to switch tabs and turn on that layer. The 17 Bridge, Morrison Bay Street have the majority of the dedicated bike paths. I now have a connectivity baseline. Since there are 2 main universities, one of which is adjacent to the downtown area, I'm going to begin my mapping exercise with those entities. If your city officials have a property location map already in KML or XML format, which is the format used here in Google, then you can easily import said file here. But it is more likely they won't have that file at the ready. It is no worry. Google has college campus property lines already mapped out with a darker gray background, as you see here. Tracing over with the Google My Maps polygon tool is all you need to do. To our example, College of Charleston has its main campus in the downtown area as stated a minute ago, but its athletic facilities are across the bay on Hog Island. Moving on to the Citadel, we've been made aware that the campus is to be a no-ride zone, so I will designate another color that will correlate with such a geofence. Having mapped that, I will then map out the remaining no-ride zones as specified by the city, the Hospital Plaza, and a few high schools in the port. Next, I'm going to map the dense commercial districts, which will be the key public demand zones for our Chariot services. In its default mapping layer, Google predefined these districts with a tan coloration. A good rule of thumb is to trace that, but use your knowledge of the locale to modify as needed. For instance, there may be a market square that has special rules governing the absence of any vehicle, including bikes. Such an area wouldn't be clearly noted on Google by default, but you can go ahead and trace around that or preemptively make it a no-ride zone. There are no such areas here in Charleston though, so we will more or less follow the trace as seen on Google. After the commercial districts, which will be key destination points, we want to map out key origin points for each day. In a college town, or in today's urban landscape, that would include large multi-family living complexes. Specifically, you want to highlight the newer property developments that are fully furnished living spaces catering to upper-class college students and recent graduates, aka your early adopters and power users. There are a couple dozen here in Charleston and more in development, but I've highlighted 4 for simplicity's sake. Now that I've got the existing zones mapped, I want to look at the growth sectors, as this could become relevant to the geofence now or in the near future depending on development, speed, and move-in density. As a Charleston resident, I know that the city is trying to revitalize the North Central Corridor. It is one of the few places where there is space to actually develop, and it is still proximal to the main commercial areas downtown. My drive around and biking of the area have further demonstrated a growing move-in population that will be prime key points of interest within the next year. So I'm going to make a general block zone around where I'm seeing the borders of this development, as well as the existing barriers like Interstate 26. We now have our main base elements to evaluate the general framework of the overall market launch geofence. Taking a real bird's eye view, I see the majority of demand and density coming from the central business and entertainment zones east of College of Charleston and the college itself. I'm a bit wary of losing density around the Citadel and the surrounding residential areas, but I do want to see how organic drop-off demand shakes out there, so I will include it. The biggest what if will be the Highway 17 bridge to Hog Island. The student living areas on the island scream, "Ride me to campus," and that dedicated bike path on the bridge alleviates many safety concerns I would otherwise have. I don't want to diminish demand off the bat, so I will include that on day one, but I'll be very watchful of how ridership and operations shake out in that area. My final consideration is the water surrounding the city peninsula. I don't want to give any vandals easy access to chuck scooters or bikes in the bay, so I'm going to leave a few 100-meter buffer around the waterways. We now have our market geofence in place. The final step is to define our launch day deployment hubs. A general rule of thumb is to keep density above all else. However, no geography is perfectly laid out to achieve that while testing demand. So I will place a few strategic hubs at some of the more distant, dense housing in the northern corridor. But for all others, they will be to capture as much demand around the College of Charleston and the downtown entertainment zones. Since we are not permitted to deploy day one on campus, but devices can migrate to campus, we will make it as easy for students, faculty, and staff to grab a scooter or e-bike on the borders of campus. Pay special attention to off-campus remote parking lots or garages and the fraternity and sorority residences on the campus border. These will be hotspots. Apart from that, be very strategic in the rest of the deployment hubs. Remember, for this exercise, we're starting with 70 hubs. Charleston has a fantastic local metro setup, and micromobility is a complementary piece of that puzzle. So, a bus depot and adjacent hubs are ideal. As well, there is a plethora of dense housing and hospitality locations that are perfect locations for morning commuters. Remember, you will not hit a bullseye with every hub location. That is what the follow-on data is for. In a few weeks to a couple months, you'll have requisite data to justify modifying hubs, expanding the number of hubs, or consolidating your area of operations until you can increase your fleet size.